this live was like 2 hours long, there was a few minutes that was in here that I want y'all to pay attention to. And when you facing the nation, you talking to the nation, and the nation has concerns, financial, emotional, health concerns. You don't tell them that people would have been dying on airplanes, and like there's so much going on that he like so unattached to the situation that it seemed like he not sincere. Like in the very beginning, in some of the press conferences, he was kind of sincere, but right now, nah, you ain't sincere, bro.
Well, you didn't ask the other question. What would have happened? Because this is the question that I've been asking Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx for a long time, and they've been working on this for a long time. The question is, what would have happened if we did nothing? Because there was a group that said, let's just write it out. Let's write it out. What would have happened? And that number comes in at 1.5 to 1.6 million people, up to 2.2 and even beyond. So that's 2.2 million people would have died if we did nothing. We just carried on our life. Now, I don't think that would have been possible because you would have had people dying all over the place. This would not have been a normal life. How many people have even seen anybody die? You would have seen people dying on airplanes. You would have been seeing people dying in hotel lobbies. You would have seen death all over. So I think from a practical standpoint, that couldn't have been carried out too far. But if you did nothing on the higher side, the number would be 2.2 and maybe even more, and on the lower side, 1.6 million people.
Understood, but if 100,000 is the number with full mitigation, how do you push it? How do you push it lower?
So no, we'll go together. We've been at this a long time. You go first.
So, John, it's an obvious, very good question. If this is full mitigation and it's 100,000, why am I standing here saying I want to make it better? Because that's what the model tells you it's going to do. What we do is that every time we get more data, you feed it back in and remodel. Is the model really telling you what's actually going on? And again, I know my modeling colleagues are going to not be happy with me, but models are as good as the assumptions you put into them. And as we get more data, then you put it in, and that might change. So even though it says, according to the model, which is a good model that we're dealing with, this is full mitigation. As we get more data, as the weeks go by, that could be modified.
Why does the model now, the top line on the lowball estimate, why does that not top out? I think it said 240,000, not 200,000. Is that a change? Is that because the states haven't been doing enough?
You know, it just has to do with if you had more New Yorks and New Jerseys, you know, Chicago, Detroit, LA, Dallas, Houston, you know, all of our major cities modeled like New York. That's what gets us into trouble. But I am reassured by looking at the Seattle line, by looking at the LA line, by looking at what California's been able to do, that that is not something that I don't believe that's going to happen. That is the outside case of having 10, 15 metros like New York and the New Jersey metro area.
New York had community spread pretty early undetected, so don't many of those other states, if not more of them, who had even less information, aren't they likely to see the same spike?
Well, California and Washington State reacted very early to this. I mean, yes, Washington State had some of the earliest infections. They have kept it low and steady, and for now a month has been tracking it with a small increase in the number of cases, but not this logarithmic form of the virus. And so that's the piece that we're trying to prevent. That's the piece that we're trying to prevent in New Orleans, in Detroit, in Chicago, and in Boston right now. And trying to make sure that each of those cities work more like California than the New York metro area.
Mr. President, I just wanted to get your thoughts on face masks. We asked you about this yesterday and you signaled you were thinking about it.
And just to end the last topic, though, I think I can say this because I spoke to Dr. Birx before and to Dr. Fauci. For whatever reason, New York got off to a very late start. And you see what happens when you get off to a late start. New Jersey got off to, and I think both governors are doing an excellent job, but they got off to a very late start. When you look at Washington State, if you remember, that all started in a very confined nursing home. And you had 20 some odd people, I believe, dying in one home. That doesn't mean it escaped that home. And so they have a very different statistic than other states. But I mean, I remember it very vividly, the nursing home in Washington State, where you had many people dying. Every day people were dying in the one exact location. So they were able to keep that, relatively speaking, into that location.
But on the facial coverage.
Were you surprised when you saw these projections? The numbers are sobering.
They're very sobering, yeah. When you see 100,000 people, that's at a minimum number. Now, what we're looking at, and as many people as we're talking about, whatever we can do under that number and substantially under that number, we've done that through really great mitigation. We've done that through a lot of very dedicated American people. That 100,000 is, according to modeling, a very low number. In fact, when I first saw the number, and I asked this a while ago, they said it's unlikely you'll be able to attain that. I think we're doing better than that. Now, I think we have to see, but I think we're doing better than that because, as John said, that would be, a lot of lives taking place over a relatively short period of time. But think of what would have happened if we didn't do anything. I mean, I've had many friends, business people with great, actually, common sense. They said, why don't we write it out? A lot of people have said, a lot of people have thought about it. Write it out. Don't do anything. Just write it out and think of it as the flu. But it's not the flu. It's vicious. When you send a friend to the hospital and you call up to find out how is he doing, it happened to me, where goes to the hospital, he says goodbye, he's sort of a tough guy, a little older, a little heavier than he'd like to be, frankly. And you call up the next day, how's he doing? And he's in a coma? This is not the flu. So we would have seen things had we done nothing. But for a long while, a lot of people were asking that question, I think, right? I was asking it also. I mean, a lot of people were saying, well, let's just write it out. This is not to be written out, because then you would have been looking at potentially 2.2 million people or more. 2.2 million people in a relatively short period of time. If you remember, they were looking at that concept. It's a concept, I guess, it's a concept. If you don't mind death, a lot of death.